Morning, everyone. 17 minutes after the hour. Welcome back to the Sunrise Show. Craig Fronikin, and on the phone with me, PhD and a senior fellow with the Pacific Research Institute. You can get to pacificresearch.org, Dr. Wayne Winegarden. And we showcased him when he put out mid-year last year, the 50-state small business regulation index. It's fascinating. It's a 124-page report, and it talks about the burdens of regulatory structures per state and how people naturally will gravitate away from regulation and go to the states that have least or the least amount of regulation. And Oregon was in the lowest top 10, the worst top 10. And now Dr. Winegarden has another report out. This is titled Regulating the Upstream Industry, Getting the Balance Right. And it talks about maximizing resources on energy. And Wayne, thanks so much for being on the program. And, you know, I just had never thought about this. And you are spot on. The states, because of their own regulatory issues, they don't play fair when it comes to state borders on oil and natural gas and coal and all that, do they?
Now, it is a lot of variation between the federal government, what they call federal lands, and the state lands, and across states there's lots of differences. And when you see some states, they go and they over-regulate, or they take all sorts of delays and make it very difficult for energy companies to produce. And you know, shockingly, when you make it harder for someone to do an activity, they do less of it. And so you see that in places like, if you look along the border between Montana and North Dakota, and they share the same oil basin, which is the reserves where all this oil is.
Right.
And I'm sure lots of people have heard of the oil boom that's happening in North Dakota. It's not happening in Montana. And while there's some geological reasons, this, that, and the other, but there's also a big part of it are the regulations. Montana makes it a lot more difficult to produce there. It's more costly. It's more timely. And lo and behold, you see a lot less economic activity, where North Dakota has experienced a fantastic boom. They've driven the low energy prices that have helped the entire U.S. economy. So much of that is from North Dakota, and Montana just has not kept up.
No, and I have so many questions because of the economic boom in the Midwest, all throughout there with the fracking, and then the pressure because of the government, the foreign oil versus the U.S. oil, and then all this natural gas. And locally here, the Pacific Connector Pipeline, local residents have been up in arms because they changed the permit. So we'll get into that a little bit later, because they went from a import permit that was kind of awarded to the pipeline company to an export permit, and now all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, pretty impressive. But back to your study, the energy, Montana, North Dakota, that's it, and then California. But you talked about banning fracking technologies. Looks like New York has banned, and they're going to lose $11 billion in economic output between now and 2020. This is fascinating.
Yeah, the New York, Pennsylvania, it really is fascinating. What you have, for those viewers or those listeners not completely up to speed, there's all sorts of natural gas that we could never get to because we didn't have the technology. And what fracking does is it's proven safe. It does, and there's all sorts of regulations so that it's done safely, and it doesn't harm the environment. But what it does is it opens up trillions of cubic feet of natural gas that we could never get to before. And that's what's providing all of the kind of the cheap electricity that we're now experiencing. Now, Pennsylvania has gone, they said, okay, we're going to regulate this smartly. We're going to allow the fracking to occur. And what you see along the Pennsylvania border, and this just happens to be where the natural gas is. It kind of flows between Pennsylvania and New York and a little bit down towards West Virginia. And so all along that part of the the Pennsylvania-New York border, there's basically boom towns. The budgets are in surplus. There's tons of jobs. The economy is flourishing, not just in the fracking industries, but in all the supporting industries as well. And if you go 10, 20 miles across the border to New York, and New York has banned it. They said, we're not going to allow fracking to occur. And those towns along the border, they're depopulating, there's no jobs, the budgets are in deficit. I mean, it's a stark contrast along that one border. And again, it's the exact same resource, right? The natural gas doesn't obey state boundaries.
No.
It flows geologically where it's going to go.
It's amazing.
You just see it.
Well, it is, and then you wonder. Okay, and just being ignorant about it myself, I thought the states played fair, and really hadn't thought about it much. But looking back, I thought, well, they must have. But now I see where the regulatory, and you point out in your introduction and the listing of the federal regulations. This is amazing. The Safe Drinking Water Act, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Toxic Substances Control Act. I'm halfway through the federal insecticide, the fungicide, the Rodenticide Act, the Natural Environmental Policy. I mean, it goes on. The Resource Conservation Recovery. It's nuts.
Yeah, this is the most heavily regulated industry in the country. And you got to remember, not only do they have all their special regulations they need to deal with, they have to deal with just like the workers' compensation regulations or the unemployment insurance. I mean, so this is not an unregulated industry. This is not some sort of free market wheeler dealer with these people coming in doing whatever they want. This is a heavily regulated industry, and the environmental safety between along Pennsylvania where the fracking is occurring compared to New York, there's no difference. This is not an issue of helping the environment versus not helping the environment. It's an issue of are we going to allow safe kind of use of these resources, or are we going to ban that?
And you know what happened here in Oregon, Wayne? We're visiting with Dr. Wayne Winegarden, and he's a senior fellow with the Pacific Research Institute. You can get to the website, pacificresearch.org, and he's put out 2 studies. One last year was the 50-state small business regulation index, and then this recent regulating the upstream industry, getting the balance right, and it's craziness when you think about it. But our own governor in the state of Oregon outlawed any energy coming in from coal-fired power plants. They just said, no, not going to happen. And the legislature approved it. I mean, they wrote the law and she approved it, so they're not going to have it. And then not so far after that, one of the coal plants in Wyoming, they filed for bankruptcy. And you're going, and the cost of energy is going up for Oregonians.
That's right. And the really terrible thing about this, I'm actually looking into these issues right now. When you look at who these policies hurt the most,
right,
it's the lowest income people.
That's right? Exactly.
If you're wealthy, you can afford, $10, $20, $30 more a month. Okay, you can pay that, and it doesn't make a difference. But for people whose incomes have not been growing, right? We've had income stagnation for 15, 16 years. For those families, that makes a big difference.
Oh, it's huge, and that was exactly the pushback. But the Democrats in Oregon, because it's Democrat-held House and Senate, and then a Democratic governor who was appointed, they didn't care. And the fact that the lower income the folks with lower income, they will be the ones with higher energy costs. And the problem was it didn't change the overall factor of clean energy and those type of things, and particulates in the air and all of that. It was in a thousandths percent or something. It was like 0.03% or whatever that would have changed as far as global warming and the like. And it's just nuts. Wayne, when we're coming up on a break here, but it would be interesting to see, because in your report you talk about California and their overall tax and regulatory environment, and what you portray perfectly in your 50-state small business index. People move away. They want the more freedom. And Oregon was in the bottom 10 of that whole report. I want to find out, related to the minimum wage, what that's done for Oregon, since it just changed July 1st. And then once again, the unemployment rates. You even identified the unemployment rates in Pennsylvania, whatnot, going up. So this whole thing is it's amazing to me because it doesn't help Americans. It makes it more difficult.
No, you're exactly right. And when you talk, how do you sustainably get our unemployment rates down? And what we need is a vibrant economy. And
right.
when we reason we look at the energy is because you don't have a vibrant economy if we don't have cheap, affordable energy. It's just a fact. And so the policies that we do that raise the cost of electricity, raise the cost of gasoline, that's going to reduce our standard of living. It's just a cause and effect because the economy runs on energy. Now, the good news, of course, is that we become more energy efficient each and every year.
Right.
So and it's like with the fracking technology, clean coal technology, when you talk about natural gas and the evolution of natural gas, that's a cleaner technology. There's the whole issue of nuclear electricity, right? Nuclear power plants, which are much cleaner. If we can kind of bring that conversation back to the forefront and try to push that clean energy source. But the idea is we need policies that can kind of balance our competing interests. And right now, we have policies that are so skewed against the economy and against the electricity or the energy sectors. And then we ask ourselves, why aren't we getting growth? Why is the unemployment rate higher? Why are incomes not growing? And so really what we were looking at in this study is you have so many great case studies. There was one study, I don't know if I had time before the break to get into it,
barely,
where you have a perfect case study between federal lands and state lands in Wyoming. And just to give right to the punchline, you have on the federal lands, it costs the exact same geology. So there's none of this kind of craziness, well, are these lands the same? They're the exact same land, but on the federal side, it's $200,000 more per well to drill in the federal lands compared to state Wyoming lands. And that is what kind of directly starts decreasing our growth, increasing our energy costs, increasing our unemployment.
Yeah, and let's pick it up right there because Pennsylvania added 214,000 jobs and New York did not. So we'll come right back with Dr. Wayne Winegarden and his latest report after this break. Good morning, everyone. 35 minutes after the hour. Welcome to the Sunrise Show. Craig Fronikin as your host, and continuing with Dr. Wayne Winegarden. He's just put out a most interesting study, the study coming out of the Pacific Research Institute, pacificresearch.org, and regulating the upstream industry, getting the balance right. And we're talking about energy production and being crippled from state to state. And I was just talking to Dr. Winegarden on the break about what you're looking at is when you're trying to live under all of these federal regulations, and Dr. Winegarden has listed there's got to be 10 or 12 or 15 of these things, and you're going, how does anyone do it? But yet when the federal government messes up, like the Gold King mine wastewater spill in Colorado and the Colorado Animas River toxic spill there, and the pictures are horrific, and you wonder, who's being prosecuted for that? Not a single soul, as far as I can tell. And you're going, well, okay, so if the government screws up, they're just pass. But if anyone else screws up, they're going to go to jail, and the regulations are going to come down like a ton of bricks. Wayne, what do we do there?
we hold everyone to the same standards. And two, I think to some extent this is an illustration of why less and less control needs to be in the federal government. More energy regulations need to be done at the state level, and it needs to be done by private entities that have the innovation, that have the incentives to go and ensure that these things are managed correctly and are the right balance between kind of production and safety for the environment. And so this illusion that the federal government does a better job of managing these resources than the states can, or the states and private entities can, is just that, an illusion. And we need more state control over those state natural lands and those resources, and less federal control. I think that's one of the big lessons from this.
Well, exactly. And you talked about the costs of federal property, drilling on federal property, then on private property. And I'll tell you, you're speaking to the choir here, because Oregon is 57%. Controlled and managed by the federal government between U.S. Forest Service, BLM, and, federal lands. And you're like going, wait a minute. And, then even our county to the north, Josephine County, they're like 70% controlled. And you're thinking, how can there be any quality private enterprise when you've got that overall control from the get-go? And with all of the prices and increases and everything else, and you're thinking, okay, less Fed, more state. And I kind of go one step further, Wayne, and that is, where was the governor when they were able to stand up for sovereign states' rights on this?
Oh, absolutely. And to me, it's even worse in that you have this federal regulator who's sitting in Washington, D.C., and he has no idea, or very little idea, in terms of the differentiations between forests in Oregon compared to a forest, let's say, in the southeast of the country, or even if he does, let's assume he does, but he's not in an ability to really differentiate that. He has that one-size-fits-all regulation. And so, but how you manage a forest in Oregon needs to be very different than how you manage a forest in other parts of the country. So that's one of the big reasons why we need more of the state and less of the federal government, beyond just the fact that the federal government seems to do a bad job in those places they are regulating. But they're just not positioned to do it. And that is for forests, that's for the drilling, the mining, natural gas, coal, all of these industries. The more the federal government gets involved, the less appropriate the regulations become to that local environment.
Well, exactly. And we just recently, we were talking about this Owyhee Canyonlands National Monument proposal, and it would lock up 2.5 million acres if President Barack Obama goes through and does this proposed monument. And you wonder, okay, let's see, the value of grazing rights, the value of water rights, and the value of mineral rights, and you once again on the federal government side. But here's the next thing, Wayne. What can people do? Because I ask them all the time. I said, hey, if you're getting bad service from somewhere, whether it's a bad retail purchase, or even you go through a fast food or a restaurant and they bring you the wrong steak or the wrong French fries, or they don't deliver anything at all, you immediately say, hey, I didn't get what I ordered. But when it comes to something like this, everybody is mute. They don't feel like they can do anything, and it's just frustration. What can people do, Wayne?
I think it's a fantastic question. To me, I think the first step is we need to get that conversation going, that people, one, start to understand what's really going on, and two, push back on some of these kind of environmental statements that almost are becoming religious in its, you can't talk against it, right? If you say anything about, well, we want to use this forest land for mining or grazing or whatever other reason, and not for just simply kind of left alone to how these environmentalists claim it needs to be used, you're demonized. And I think we need to actually start having a conversation. Nobody wants to destroy the environment.
Right.
Everybody wants to keep the forest healthy. But the fact of the matter is, in many instances, when a forest is privately managed, that becomes a healthier forest than these ones that are under the federal control.
Oh,
so we need to actually start looking at the situation more honestly and start asking the right questions and having that conversation, going back and forth, honestly discussing these, as opposed to just, it almost feels that the debate gets shut down before it can even get started.
Exactly. And your recent report is fascinating because it ties in the economic benefit from state to state. And you look at the stark contrast. Pennsylvania, they had the, correct or better for the economy, proposal. And they have 214,000 jobs that have been added. These are living wage jobs that blow right by the $15 minimum wage thing. And then New York, it's banned all fracking, and they've lost $11 billion. So you have that stark contrast. Then you have the labor market and the unemployment rate throughout the United States with all the regulations. And then you bridge the state regulations in energy out in the West with Montana and North Dakota. And it's talking about thousands of jobs and billions in economic activity. Wayne, this is a fantastic report, and it ties in with the 50 state small business, the regulation index. It's unbelievable. And people need to be looking at this and saying, what can we do? And get out of the way, federal government.
That's right.
Well,
That's right. And get back to a sounder regulatory environment.
Well, exactly. And, this is once again, and we're discovering now even more with more clarity, Americans are discovering that there are two sets of rules. There are the rules for the elite and whatever, and then the rules under the rule of law that the, little people will get blasted by and hauled off in handcuffs, but no, the rule of law, we are trying to hang on to with everything in our muster. And it just doesn't seem like it's working very well. We've got to stand up for this, or otherwise America is going to go away. So, Wayne, it's great to have you on the program, and I'm going to go through this report some more, and maybe we can talk again soon, because with the minimum wage as the stair-stepping and the wage compression, your report that came out last year, the 50 state small business regulation index, it's going to be even more appropriate, isn't it?
We continue to look into this issue because it's so important. We've had wage stagnation for 16 years, and it's policy driven. It's not anything mysterious, and we need to start reestablishing those policies that can get the economy growing, that can reinvigorate entrepreneurship. And bring back reinvigorate that American dream. And that's really kind of what we continue to look at because it is so important.
Yeah, and then standing up for liberty, justice, and freedom against the bureaucrats that just decide to do whatever they want to do. So it's great. Well, Wayne, we're out of time, but it's always a pleasure, sir, to have you on the program. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Wayne Winegarden. He's a PhD and a senior fellow with the Pacific Research Institute. Their website, pacificresearch.org. And Wayne, let's do this again real soon.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
All right. You bet. Thank you so much. All right, let's get to a break and come right back. More on the Sunrise Show. We'll take your calls as well. 541-772-8255. Ties in with the most regulation and the folks moving away from the worst states, and Oregon's one of them. I've got those exact reports from Wayne's graph when we come back. More on the Sunrise Show after this break.